Eastern Orthodox Christianity was first brought into China via China's neighbor, Russia. In 1685, the Chinese conquered Albazin, which lay in Russia on the northern Chinese border, and took captive of a large number of Cossacks and Orthodox Albazinians. 45 of these entered the service of the Chinese emperor and were taken to Beijing together with their priest, Father Maximus. The Emperor Kangxi graciously received them and granted Father Maximus an old Buddhist temple to convert into a Christian church for the spiritual needs of his people. Houses for priests were built, and the church, dedicated to the holy wisdom of God, was consecrated in 1698. In 1712, Father Maximus reposed, and Emperor Kangxi gave permission for another priest to come from Russia to Beijing in order to replace him. In Beijing, the Orthodox priests were called lamas, and an Orthodox archimandrite was called Ta Lama. As time went on, the Albazinians intermarried with the Chinese, and their descendants soon became indistinguishable from the Chinese populace. These descendants remained firm in their orthodoxy. In succeeding decades, the Orthodox mission in China was hindered owing to political problems which arose between Russia and China. Preaching to the Chinese was restricted. Nevertheless, from 10 to 40 Chinese converted to Orthodoxy each year in Beijing. Some of these early converts became iconographers, adorning the church in Beijing with Orthodox icons painted in Chinese style. In 1858, the political climate changed. With the Treaty of Tientsin, the right of residence was granted to Christian missionaries. This began a new period for the Chinese Orthodox mission. Archimandrites and priests who came from Russia translated and printed the New Testament, Psalter, and Orthodox services in Chinese, thus laying the foundations for a native Chinese orthodoxy. Preaching of the gospel extended beyond Beijing to Tongtin'an, where a church was built and many Chinese villagers became fervent Orthodox Christians. Churches were also opened in Hangzhou and Kalgan. In 1880, the first native Chinese Orthodox priest, Father Mitrofan Chang, or Chang Shizhong, was ordained by St. Nicholas Kazatkin, Bishop of Tokyo. Father Mitrofan's acceptance of the priesthood was an act of heroism, for at that time it was more dangerous and difficult to be a Christian than at any time in Chinese history. Anti-foreign and anti-Christian sentiments had grown strong in China in reaction to the colonial expansionism of European powers during the second half of the 19th century. Outbreaks of violence would occur, resulting in the deaths of foreigners and Chinese Christian converts. When he became a priest, Father Mitrofan said that he knew his end, quote, would not be pleasant. He and his people were being constantly put to the test, being branded devils second class, better only than the foreign devils. Though he was regarded as having betrayed his Chinese culture by becoming a Christian, he knew that he had embraced a faith that transcended culture, and that the revelation of Christ was as much the property of China as it was of any other country. Looking above all political and cultural concerns, he perceived in his spirit that he was training his Chinese Orthodox flock to join the ranks of the martyrs in heaven. In 1897, the Chinese Orthodox Church received a great blessing with the arrival in Beijing of Archimandrite Innocent Figorovsky, later bishop, who proved to be the most far-sighted Russian priest to ever have come to China. Among other things, he established a monastery, ensured that daily services were conducted in the Chinese language, sent out people from Beijing to spread the message of Christ, and established works of charity. This helped to strengthen the Chinese church and prepare her for the severest trial of her existence. In 1900, there occurred the infamous outbreak known as the Boxer Rebellion. The rebellion was carried out by a secret society of martial artists/occultists called the Spirit Boxers, who vowed to rid China of foreigners and Christians. On being initiated into the sect, they claimed to be inhabited by a god who endowed them with superhuman powers. When they began laying siege on Beijing, they hunted down Chinese Christians and ordered them to worship their gods, or be tortured and killed. Thousands of Christians were slain through butchery, beheading, and immolation. During the Boxer Rebellion, the Orthodox churches in Beijing, Tongting-an, and Kalgan were destroyed, together with the Orthodox print shop with its unpublished translations and immense collection of movable type in Chinese characters. On the night of June 11th, 1900, the Boxers attacked the church in Beijing. According to the testimony of eyewitnesses, the Chinese Orthodox Christians there met death with tremendous courage. Paul Wan, an Orthodox teacher, died with prayer on his lips. Io Wen, another teacher, was tortured twice. The first time, the Boxers hacked at her and cast her to the ground half dead. When she regained consciousness, the Boxers again laid hold of her and this time tortured her to death. Both times Io Wen confessed Christ joyfully before her tormentors. The Boxers burned down the buildings of the Beijing Orthodox Mission on the evening of June 14th. Many of the believers, hiding themselves from the perils, gathered at Father Mitrofan's home. Among these were several who had formerly been ill-disposed towards the priest, and yet he did not turn them away. Perceiving that some were faint-hearted, he encouraged them. At 10 o'clock in the evening on June 23rd, soldiers and Boxers surrounded Father Mitrofan's residence. At that time, there were more than 70 Christians there. The stronger fled, while Father Mitrofan and many others, mostly women and children, remained and were slaughtered. Father Mitrofan sat in the yard before his home, and the Boxers stabbed his chest repeatedly. He fell beneath a date tree. Father Mitrofan's wife and 3 sons were at the site of the murder. After the Boxers had killed Father Mitrofan, they grabbed his 7-year-old son John and severed his arms at the shoulder and cut off his toes, nose, and ears. Deep gashes were cut into his chest. The next morning he sat naked and unshod in the doorway. Street urchins mocked him, calling him a follower of devils. But the boy retorted, "I am a believer in God and not a follower of devils." When people asked him if he was in pain, he said that he was not. With a smile, the little boy said, "It is not hard to suffer for Christ." Later that day, the Boxers returned and took away Father Mitrofan's wife, Tatiana, and his sons John and Isaiah, together with Isaiah's 19-year-old fiancée, Maria, and 15 other believers. Prantasi Chan and Rodian Zhu, who had not yet been baptized, bore witness that little John, still feeling no pain from the mutilation, went quietly with the Boxers and showed not a trace of fear. All of the prisoners were beheaded. Of Father Mitrofan's family, only his second son, Sergei, survived. He later became an archpriest. The Boxers killed 30,000 Chinese Christians in the summer of 1900, 222 of whom were Chinese Orthodox Christians. Among the Chinese Orthodox martyrs were descendants of the original Albizinian Orthodox in Beijing, Clement Qiuqian, Matthew Haixuan, his brother Vit, Anna Chiu, and many others. The Church in Russia immediately proclaimed the Chinese Orthodox martyrs as saints and instituted special church services in their honor to be performed every year on June 11th, the day their martyrdom began. Holy Chinese Orthodox martyrs, pray to God for us.